Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy. 4 nerds by nerds, hanging out with a couple of nerds.
Nate the Nerdarch.
Nerdarch is Ted.
Today we bring you Druid versus the Nature Priest. Who wins? You decide. Jump down the description below where you can find Nerdarchy the newsletter, game weekly tips, as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
So, Nature Cleric versus the Druid. Are we
No
talking
hards,
combat?
death match to the end of battle. Could be combat, but I don't think that's where we're going with this one.
I think we're going as to, which choice do you make if you're looking for that divine nature-y caster?
Yeah, well, in your game, we have a Druid
And a Nature Cleric.
and a Nature Cleric. I feel like Druid kind of is like, from a mechanical standpoint and from like a player standpoint, a lot of times when someone picks Druid, they're like, I just want to turn into an animal and rip things to shreds.
And that's kind of what your son wants to do.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get. But why would one become a Nature Cleric, Nate?
Well, okay, so I made the joke earlier. I was like, well, yeah, because I didn't want a wild shape. I didn't want to turn into anything. So I wanted to be nature-y and, elven without. And I picked High Elf, so it was kind of an offbeat thing. But I chose Nature Cleric because I wanted to have more of the divine aspect and being chosen as a character rather than, I feel like Druids are like I'm just this, like I have this power, or like more like a sorcerer or wizard kind of feel to it, like they chose how to do this and why, rather than where I feel like a divine mandate to do this. So
Well, Dave, this was your video suggestion, and you were like, there's not really a huge difference between the two character types. It's like, do you want a wild shape or do you want to wear heavy armor? Kind of seems to be the...
It almost, well, mechanically, yes, but it's almost like if you ever heard someone go, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, right? And the Druid is that guy.
Right.
I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
So what it actually, if you actually bust out your player's handbook, it says the cleric is the conduit or the imbued with divine magic, whereas the druid, they're extensions of nature's indomitable will. So do you want to serve nature or do you want to serve a nature god is kind of more along the lines of the decision you're going to make.
yeah, and be kind of a conduit and personal
Personification?
personal appearance of what that god represents.
Yeah, I feel like, a druid might have more of a holistic view of nature, where the nature priest is very much, whatever the interest of their god is. That's exactly what they're going to be. Because you could be a nature priest domain and be, a sea cleric or, some other terrain or element. It would still kind of fit. Maybe Tempest would make more sense. It just depends on what aspects of that deity that you really care about.
Well, yeah, the domain spell breakdown, Tempest would probably work better, but I see what you mean. You're going for that. What kind of nature aspect am I going to take on?
Yeah, and or even in some ways, even like a home and hearth, where you tend more towards you're like a veterinary of clerics, where you're that aspect, and which would be important in like a farming community where there's livestock to be tended, and it's part of their life.
Especially because they get to speak with animals. Hey, what's wrong? Like, how often can you ask the horse? Where does it hurt?
Yeah, and they get the divination. They can do charm animal and plant creatures. So that's a big deal. I used that to get out of an encounter before. And
I kind of feel a little bit like the druid is more in harmony with nature, where maybe the nature priest is going to try and command it more.
yeah, part of having dominion over it, as if you're like a mini avatar of your god. Your god.
Well, I mean that's actually what you strive for at level 20. That's typically what you get.
Yeah, so I think that falls in line with that idea, is that a nature god's going to have dominion over nature, so you're basically heading in that direction towards dominion, rather than asking a squirrel for help. You're telling it you need help, and it's going to help you.
Also, the nature cleric is very broad in a sense, where the druid through your archetype or your druid circle, you're going to kind of pick. And, if we include the Unearthed Arcana, we have 5 different archetypes
Right.
to work with. We have the Twilight, we have the Shepherd, we have the land, we have Circle of the Moon, and then we have also, was it Dream or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was Dream.
Which is weird for a druid, but yeah.
Well, it's
because it's
the
fairy. That's almost like a way for the druid to revere different aspects of nature. And again, the druid traditionally in previous editions, there was a lot more of an organization that went to being a druid as well.
Because they modeled it off of what was like
Historical.
thought to be historical. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if the druids in times of yore actually had trial by combat, but in AD&D, like, you got to a certain point in your druid level and you couldn't progress without defeating the guy that was on that level next, and there was only one guy in a region for that level. And then until the further you got up, like that expanded to it's like there's only one in the world of this, and if you want to beat it, you have to beat the guy that's already there.
Yeah, I'm glad they got rid of that mechanic. I didn't play druids back then, and I don't know whether that was a factor in my mentality or not, but it was definitely something that was a strike against it.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, like, the only guy that would be able to mentor you into becoming like the next arch druid or whatever, you're gonna eventually have to kick his ass in order to hold the title and get the level. So that was a weird Gygaxiism from AD&D.
Yeah, it's where your level didn't just depend on your personal skill and experience, but also there was a hierarchy to it. So it was a bit peculiar.
Now, also, I feel like druids tend to be, if you're gonna have the hermit character, like, their druid is going to be more like that, where you're more likely to be an acolyte if you're a nature druid. I mean, a nature cleric. Yep. You're going to belong to a clergy and an organization, where they kind of stripped that away a little bit from the druid in this edition. Now, they do have some kind of organization because they have a secret language, but like that seems like to be the only like remnant from previous editions that I can really see.
And I feel that druids are more of the way they show people nature is by doing either activities or just saying, like, well, it's self-evident, like, look around you, this is the teachings of what's going on in the natural world, while clerics are more like heady, I think. I mean, you're still based on wisdom, but you're more like explaining the
you're also too
aspects.
It's like, well, this is this way because Sylvanus made it so.
Yeah, it's more like includes more proselytizing than I would say any amount of druid would do.
Right, well, because, they just revere nature for what nature is, where your nature cleric's going to be like, they're revering, in their mind, the guy that made it the way it is, not so much the thing itself. They love the thing because they love the guy that made it.
Or do they love the guy that made it because they love the thing? It's a big circle.
It could go either way. And then also, like, the thing about the druid is weird in the sense that their weapon requirements, their proficiencies, all are kind of like symbolic. They're either symbolic or they're actually, they come from nature, or there's something you would use in surviving nature.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of strange that they kept the druid that way, but they did not impose that penalty
on anybody
else of the clerics. So,
No.
I mean, you think that someone that would use something symbolic and for specific purpose, or wouldn't use something as like a show of solidarity with, would be someone who's worshiping a god, so it kind of would make more sense to have weapon restrictions based on what they consider their deity's preferences and symbolism, rather than the druid, which would probably just be like, hey, I'm just trying to survive in the woods, someone's going to give me a metal axe, I'm going to use it.
Right. Like I find it odd that they don't have a hand axe on their proficiency list, because it's just a super useful tool in the wilderness.
And it messes with their wild shape mojo.
The thing that's interesting is it says they won't use armor or shields made of metal, but weapons, they're allowed to use whatever they want. Whereas in editions in the past, they had a set of weapons, and this is the only thing they were allowed to use.
Well, they only get certain weapon proficiencies.
Yeah, they don't.
Well,
like clubs, daggers, darts, javelins.
Right. Well, if I play a dwarven druid,
yeah, you're going to have your.
I'm going to be able to use the axe because I'm proficient with it.
Yeah, it's not a restriction. It's just what they get proficiency with.
Right. So I find that interesting. Whereas in the past, they couldn't use those.
Yeah,
things.
regardless, you weren't.
Regardless of what you were proficient with, you weren't going to get to use those other things.
Yeah, but they kept it in the sense that they still get this weird selection of proficiencies.
Yeah, that's true.
That are kind of like all over the place. Like some of them
Sense.
like the quarterstaff, because you would use it like hiking and stuff like that, and you can just find it. Same thing with a club, you can just find it in nature. A spear is a tool for hunting.
A sickle is for gathering herbs and other things. So
Druid stuff, yeah. And then there's the scimitar.
Because,
the
crescent thing.
crescent moon and
Yes.
the crescent of the scimitar.
Yeah, I feel like the sickle is the same way, even though it's, again, you can use it to harvest, but at the same time, it also is like, it has that aesthetic.
It's got the aesthetic, and that's the only thing going for it, because it's not like it's a tool elsewhere. It's a sword. It's a weapon of war. That's it. So what other distinctions do we need to get into?
Well, spell selection wise, the cleric's going to have open to it more dealing with things like ideas of good and evil and things like. While the nature domain adds a good amount of druid feeling and nature feeling spells. Like
It's just not going to give them all.
you're not going to get things like the tsunami. Like the druid is really. They say they're. I feel like that's mastery over the world when you can drop a tsunami on somebody.
Yeah, well, the only thing like the cleric gets, other than that short list of spells that are kind of naturey, is if it so happens that those spells are at the same time kind of biblical, because the cleric does get a lot of those spells. I think like insect plague,
Flame strike.
earthquake. So they're all like all the spells that they get that seem kind of naturey are still only there because they're more biblical, and that's where they're originally drawn from.
You're enacting, your God's will upon the land.
Yeah, so that flows as well. While the druid's higher level spells, I feel like they just have that mastery over.
Well, the bulk of all of the druid spells have to do with you're influencing animals, you're influencing plants, you're influencing the elements, where you're going to get a lot less of that with the cleric. I mean, you can kind of like pick and choose to make it feel that way,
Right.
but it really is like an inferior spell selection to the druid,
Well,
if you're going for a theme.
Because the cleric is more the leader, the healer type that are supposed to be more interacty, whereas the druid is one that's used a little bit more pulled back and closer to a legitimate offensive spellcaster.
The nature sorcerers.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, that probably kind of sums it up nicely. Nature sorcerers that use weird weapons and can't wear metal armor.
And can shapeshift.
So they're werewolves now.
Werewolf nature sorcerers. With peculiarities about weapons.
So what do you guys think about nature cleric versus the druid? How do you use them in your game? What distinctions do you see that we missed? Put it in the comments below. While you're at it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Can tweet at us over on Twitter at Nerdarchy.
You also patronize us in a good way over on Patreon.
So until next time, stay nerdy.